perseverance you put in can really impact the outcome that you walk away with. He told me, "You're never going to get into law school. You're way too young." One of the attorneys approaches me for one of the defendants, and he goes, "Can we talk?" Any of you guys ever remember construction on Woodstruck Road? Immediately, collective groan across the courtroom.
Welcome to Celebrating Justice, presented by the Trial Lawyers Journal and CloudLex, the next-gen legal cloud platform built exclusively for personal injury law. Get inspired by the nation's top trial lawyers and share in the stories that shape our pursuit of justice. Follow the podcast and join our community at triallawyersjournal.com. Now here's your host, editor of TLJ and VP of Marketing at CloudLex, Chad Sands.
Tell me the story of why you wanted to become a trial lawyer.
I think my story starts where a lot of people's story starts, which is somebody when I was wee of age told me that I was really good at arguing, and so I should definitely be a lawyer one day. Probably not a compliment at the age of 11, but I certainly took it as one.
Was it a family member or a teacher?
I was probably a family member. I don't distinctly remember. Actually, no, I think it was my sister, now that I sit here and think about it. I'm pretty sure we were walking to middle school one day, and she was like, "You should really be a lawyer. You're really good at arguing." I don't think she meant it in a nice way, but here we are. And that was really something that I carried with me. I think my story's a little different than most in that I'm from Washington State originally. And in Washington, they have like a dual enrollment program, which essentially allows high school students to take college classes, different than AP. So it's not integrated into the high school, but I actually attended Washington State University starting at the age of 16. And I used the credits I got there and I applied them to my high school diploma. So I didn't graduate high school early, but I started college early, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And I really went into that with the goal in mind that, I'm going to go to law school one day. So how can I start this program that I'm starting at 16 years old to shape me for a career in law? And I went through that. I graduated. I transferred my credits over to Gonzaga University, my undergraduate. And as soon as I went in, they were like, "Okay, well, you're kind of a junior now. Like you have to pick your major. You have to decide what you're doing." And I was like, "Okay, I want to be a lawyer. Like, how do I get there?" And I went down and I sat down with the legal program advisor at Gonzaga, and he told me, "You're never going to get into law school. You're way too young. They're never going to let you in. They want people with more experience. They want people with more, not even legal experience, but life experience. Like no one's going to let you in at 19 years old. That's just not happening." And I was like, well, because you said I can't, that means it's absolutely going to happen. I mean, what else would I set out to do besides prove you wrong, sir? Right. So I picked my major. I decided, economics, that according to the internet is a great major for law school. And that's what I was working off of at the ripe age of, 16, 17 years old. I finished my undergraduate program. I started applying to law schools. And it really wasn't until COVID happened that I kind of figured out what I wanted to do with this passion. I had just always had this like open-ended legal career idea out there, but it didn't have any shape or any form to it. COVID happened. There was, all of these like social crises, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of these things happening out in the world. And I was really starting to get immersed in all of these bigger problems that are so much bigger than what I was experiencing at my small little private school. And I took I don't remember what the class was now, but it was something related to criminal law. And we watched a movie called Murder on a Sunday Morning, which is about a 15-year-old that was wrongfully charged with a murder that he didn't commit and was later exonerated on. And as soon as I watched it, I was like, I just know this is what I want to do. Like the sense of justice and passion, it just like consumed me. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to represent people. I want to help protect the justice system and like uphold the justice system. And I want to make sure that things like this don't continue to happen. And I just decided like, I want to do public defense. I want to be a trial lawyer. I want to be in the courtroom. I want to be helping people. I applied to law schools on that rhetoric. I did my interviews on that rhetoric, and it led me to William and Mary, and everything changed. And I absolutely, to this day, carry that same passion with me, but I am not a public defender. And I went into law school and I did both my summer internships at a state public defender's, then a federal public defender's office. I was in criminal law programs. And I still, like, as I sit here right now, like the sense of zealous advocacy I feel towards these people and really towards the justice system at large is just as strong. But I ended up doing mock trial and getting to meet my current bosses. And they were like, just come intern at our office. Just come check out like the personal injury side. I think it'll meet some of that same passion and it'll just twist it to a different perspective. And so I came here and I started working with sexual abuse victims. And I was like, wow, how can I even pick? Like there's two different sides of the same coin. People who need representation and aren't otherwise going to get it and aren't necessarily going to have the power or the voice to get their story across, whether it be in a criminal trial where they're the defendant or it be a civil trial where they're the plaintiff. And I just really fell in love with the work. I fell in love with the office. I fell in love with the act of the advocacy and led me here. Maybe it didn't end where I thought it was going to, but it's carried all the same virtues throughout.
Wow. Okay. So let's back up because I grew up in Washington State, actually.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in Western Washington. Did you grow up in Eastern Washington?
I grew up in Eastern Washington, Tri-Cities specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you got Cougar credits while you were in high school. Then you graduated high school like at 18 and then you went to Gonzaga, but you were basically a junior already? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did 2 years at Gonzaga and my birthday's late summer. So I technically graduated with my bachelor's at 19.
Okay.
And started law school about a week, 2 weeks after I turned 20.
Okay. So you're like a real go-getter. You're like the Doogie Howser MD of like trial law.
I try my best.
And then in law school at 19. So a lot of people end up going to law school when they don't really know what they'd want to do after they graduate college. But you were on the fast track.
I was.
And then you got recruited across the country to Virginia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How was that move?
I mean, it was certainly something. I got into William and Mary, and I actually have family that lives out here. And so Virginia was kind of on my radar, but not specifically. But I got into William and Mary and I kind of spent a few hours on their website and they had mock trial programs. And I was like, that sounds perfect. Like I want to be in a courtroom. So I ended up calling my name, and my dad and I actually drove cross country to move me here. The other day we were just looking through photos and videos and reminiscing on our like 4-day road trip from hell. It was definitely a culture shock, if nothing more, just to move to a very different place, very different style of living, very different like population. But I loved it enough that I stuck around. So.
And then, so did you get kind of recruited by Jeffrey or Kevin then?
I did, yes. I joined the mock trial team my 1L year. That's how it works at William and Mary. But Jeff is the head coach. And at the time, Kevin's since gotten more involved. But in my year, he wasn't super involved yet. And I was the first one to put my hand up and volunteer to go to competition. So I ended up just getting myself in front of Jeffrey more often, pretty early into my mock trial career. And he kind of took note of that. And it ultimately paid off because by my 3L year, he was like, just come intern, just come check it out. I think you'll like it. And, the rest is history. And here I am.
Once again, a go-getter, the first to raise your hand.
Yeah.
So I guess along those lines, I always like to ask, what makes you unique then as a trial lawyer?
I'm so early that this answer is, I think, shaping itself as I continue throughout this journey. But since graduating, I've stayed really involved with the William and Mary's mock trial program. I coached like half of the teams that they send out, just kind of as they recruit me to come help them. And I've been going to competitions this year. I've gone to 3 now, I think. 3? Yep, 3 in the last few months. And I just think that new, young, old, it offers such like a unique perspective. And I know I'm, an up and comer still in my own right, but it does let you see what the up and comers are doing, right? Like this is how they're using demonstratives. This is how they're coming up with creative arguments. These are the themes they're using. Maybe I'm not necessarily taking their evidentiary arguments away, but I can take away their creativity and I can learn from that. And it's something that really has been helping inform some decisions I'm making in my own cases as we prepare those for trial and seeing like how they are using the evidence that they're being provided and how creative they are in the arguments and the stories that they come up with, particularly in such like a closed universe. So I think, my involvement with the mock trial team, it really offers me like a unique perspective that if you aren't involved, you wouldn't necessarily see because we kind of get stuck in our own little universe up here once we like pass the bar and enter the true legal world. And so staying so involved with law students is really just like a helpful experience.
For sure. I remember when I was at college, I went to film school and I had a screenwriting class and the teacher She worked for like a producer for Rocky and like had done all these movies. She kind of basically said like, I like to see what young screenwriters are doing and what stories they're writing about. So I think I totally see how that experience gives you some insights to take back to your firm and take with you on your career, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was, I guess, Murder on a Sunday Morning. I have to check this out. This was Academy Award winner for Best Documentary Feature.
Yeah.
Yes, that kind of sparked your interest into the trial world. Do you have any other favorite legal films?
I mean, My Cousin Vinny is a classic, of course.
Right.
That's the first one that comes to mind. One of the mock trial competitions that I just went to, NTC, hosted by it's like Texas, it's called TWILA is the abbreviation. I couldn't try to spell it out, but they actually had a case packet that was based on My Cousin Vinny. So I watched it for legal research purposes, of course.
Funny enough, I watched it again recently. It still holds up. And what kind of jumped out to me, like, I guess it holds up in the sense that, well, if you really look at it from like the legal perspective, there's some holes you could poke at, you know what I mean? But it's really kind of this story of like a fish out of water for both, for Vinny himself going to the city and his clients, Ralph Macchio. I don't know who the other guy was, but they're kind of a fish out of water in this city in the South from Brooklyn, right? But then also like, it's a fish out of water story for Vinny as a lawyer and going into this courtroom and dealing with the judge. And so anyways, it still holds up. You touched on the sexual abuse that you have worked on maybe or looked into, and also the human rights campaigns, Planned Parenthood. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means to you and kind of what you're doing with that at the firm?
Yeah, one of the main practice areas that I am involved in at Breit Biniazan is working with our sexual abuse clients and handling our sexual abuse related cases. And that is something that I started on back when I was an extern. And then I've had the privilege of like kind of continuing in that niche since I joined the firm a couple of years ago, or going on a couple of years ago, I guess. And it really is just something that I feel really strongly about. Sexual assault and sexual abuse in any form is something that impacts almost every woman across the country. And that, 97% or whatever that statistic is that people kind of float around is so true. And I think being able to work with these clients and work with these victims and being able to tell their story is something that means a lot to me, not just because of my personal experiences, but because of the fact that I know that these are very real experiences lived by the clients that we do see and all of the women out there that we don't. And for every woman whose story we can share, she represents 100 women whose story will never be known and who will never have the bravery or the representation to come forward. I think it's just such critically important work, and it's hard and it's exhausting for everyone involved, not just the clients, but the vicarious trauma that we take on in learning these stories and seeing these photos and seeing these videos and carrying them forward. It really can be really hard sometimes. I think it's all worth it at the end of the day. And I've not yet had the opportunity to take one of these to trial, but our firm certainly has. And I've gotten to watch my bosses do it. And just to see the kind of relief that you can grant someone by closing this story in a way that is like so meaningful and getting them to kind of get that sense of justice that they might never have seen otherwise is so rewarding, and like in a way that I can't truly put into words, but that I'm really honored to get to participate in.
Yes, you brought up something that I have talked to another lawyer about, which is this idea of traumatic exposure response and like how you guys don't necessarily come into it firsthand but you see it through your clients, and whether they're diagnosed with cancer or like we're in a horrible car crash and they're coming in the offices, or as you talked about sexual abuse. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the exposure and how you kind of balance it both with the client, but then also kind of when you have to go home and live your life and how you kind of carry it with you?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever found the perfect balance. I know we definitely talk about it here at work. And even back when I did federal public defense, that involves a lot of sexual crimes, and same with state public defense, of course. And so throughout all of these different walks of my life, they've talked a lot about vicarious trauma and how best to handle that. And we go to these, I just came back from the Virginia Trial Lawyers Convention, and they always have mental wellness conversations and like how to deal with any form of trauma that you're receiving third hand from your clients. And I don't think there's any perfect method. I'm really blessed to be at a law firm where I think we are all really close and we can have these like kind of honest conversations with each other and say, hey, like, I need to talk this through with someone. I can't go home. I can't talk about this with my family and my friends, but I can talk about it with my paralegal. And fortunately, like her and I are really close, and that gives me a good, I think, safe landing spot if there is something that I ever just like need to talk through.
You mentioned something earlier about I think it was your high school counselor or something who told you that they were never going to let you into law school because you were too young and maybe XYZ. Do you continue to kind of run up against that as your career as a young female trial lawyer? I
think certainly in less words. People, no one ever since that day, and it really does shock me still that he said it to my face and in no unplain language, like, you will not get into law school. But you run into those challenges all the same. I like my first VTLA convention, I step in the elevator and I'm standing next to an older attorney. He goes, oh, like, are you here for the paralegal event? No, it's so nice of you to just boldly assume that just because I have like a law firm on my chest that I must be the paralegal. And I don't know if that's...
You're here for the paralegal track, aren't you?
Yes, that's what I'm here for. I got my JD and I joined a law firm just to do the paralegal track. Thank you. Right. It definitely is something that I think is going to be inevitable. It's not like I walk around with my age plastered on my chest, but I look young and I'm a young woman, and people are going to look at you a certain way and maybe treat you a certain way in certain situations. And it's just about, I think, getting used to it more than anything else, because you're not going to be able to get rid of it. And so just kind of being able to laugh it off and be like, yeah, and I'm sure you think that, and let's go in the courtroom, because I really think you just have to learn to laugh at it. And then something I have learned, being both a woman and, a young lawyer, is that it's better to be underestimated than overestimated. And I would rather you think that I am incompetent or not prepared or anything along that line than I have the opportunity to shock you and prove you wrong. And I would rather stand in the courtroom and prove people wrong 10 out of 10 times than go in there and prove them right.
You mentioned your work at the federal public defenders and the work you're doing now. And so could you share a story about a case that had a significant impact on you?
The first thing that comes to mind is probably the first major case that I ever really worked on. And, taking into consideration that I've only seen so many cases, particularly cases that have actually, reached a resolution. But not long after I joined the firm, I got recruited to work on a case that involves a big box company that I shall not name. And that big box company, one of their drivers was out delivering packages one day, and they got into a collision with my client and two of her friends when they were on their way back from lunch. And it was one of those car crashes that for a lot of people probably would not have been that life-changing. She entered the wrong intersection. She T-boned the vehicle. Wasn't super high rates of speed, but the thing that made all the difference was who was in the car that day, right? My client and her two friends, they were all elderly women. And just the impact of that crash itself was life-ending for two of the other passengers. And for my client, she broke her leg very, very, very severely and was wheelchair-bound for the rest of her life. And they're all elderly, late 80s, early 90s. Like, this is a case that immediately Big Box Company was like, they're not going to live very long. This isn't very high value. Yeah, a couple people died, but we're not too concerned about that, right? Like, let's just pay off the living one and let's put this aside. And our perspective on that is completely different. And that, I think, is what sets trial lawyers apart on the plaintiff side, right? The way that we value cases is certainly different than the way that big box company and insurance companies do. And I got brought in the case years into it. I think the collision was in 2023 or 2022, and I got brought in at least a year into litigation. And so a lot had already happened, but I got brought in because there was a lot of discovery issues going on. And we went back time and time again. I think on the same set of discovery, we went on 3 separate motions to compel, because they would produce something and then it would be redacted. So we'd have to go back. And then they would unredact it, but then all of a sudden they'd find a new page and that one would be redacted. So we have to go back again. And we went back time and time and time. I think in like a 2-month period, my boss, Kevin, and I, we were in motion to compel hearings. We went to like 4 of them in like 2 months, because we're like, no, give us these documents. We're approaching trial. This is going to happen. We don't really care if you don't like it. Like, you have to give them to us.
Right.
And I think it was 2 days before trial, we had beaten big box company down, and they finally made us an offer for an amount that we could not refuse, and an amount that she probably would not have gotten at trial given her age. But it was the perseverance of continuing to push them, and them knowing that they probably didn't want negative case law against them, telling them that they could be responsible in situations like this, that got us to that end goal. And the thing that really made it like most meaningful to me was that moment where we got to call our client and tell her, like, this is over and this is what it's over for. And like, we're finally putting this all to bed. You don't have to come tell this story ever again. You don't have to relive this experience. And just to get to spare her that moment in trial, and just to get to hear, I couldn't see her face, but the joy you could hear in her voice, and knowing that like this was going to close a chapter, and it was going to make her family, you know, safe and secure financially going forward, and like help her live a comfortable rest of her life, given, you know, the permanent disability she now had. It really was like such an impactful moment for me, and knowing that like I did pick a career path that means something, and I did pick a firm that does something, and I this makes all of it worth it, right? Like that makes that zealous advocate that's existed in the back of my mind since I was 11 years old really have something to stand up and show for. And so it really was just like a rewarding moment, particularly, you know, 6-7 months into my career.
And did you like call your sister and you're like,
I should have. Oh my gosh. I called my dad. Certainly. I was like, Dad, it's over.
Yeah.
So, cause I was like preparing my direct examination and then it all resolved like the Friday before trial was supposed to start Monday. So as they do.
What about some of the things you saw as a public defender? Do you remember any of those cases that kind of stick with you, or how, you know, the justice system works and how it kind of also shaped where you're at today?
I was only there for 2 summers. I was in Chesterfield Public Defender's Office my first summer as following my 1L year. And then I was in a Connecticut Federal Public Defender's Office my 2L summer. So very, very, you know, different kinds of public defense, very different kinds of cases that they're handling. One case that I still think about, and I tell the story to this day, I was in watching just bond hearings for one of the attorneys that they were arguing that day. And, you know, it's just a slew of them. They go up there, they talk for 5 minutes, they get a new client. I mean, it is backbreaking, severely underpaid work. And one of the clients came up, and he was, you know, an older Black male, and he had been on a city bus with his sister, who has, I couldn't tell you the health condition now, but she had some health condition that required her to have medication on her at all times. And she started to have a episode on the bus, a health episode on the bus, like a seizure or something of that sort. So she's completely incapacitated. He is holding her. He takes her medicine. He's holding her medicine. He's holding her on the bus while they wait for emergency responses to arrive. Well, emergency responses get there. He's hysterical. He's very upset. They're trying to help his sister out. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's like, no, no, no. They end up arresting him for possession of, you know, unmarked prescription medications, as well as for impeding law enforcement. And he went there on his bond hearing, and they denied the bond and left him in jail. And I just remember watching it, and just the sense of like cruelty that I felt for him in that moment, because whether or not he did or did not technically commit the crime that they had charged him with, because yes, he was holding a prescription bottle that was not in his name. And yes, he did not just hand over her body to emergency services as soon as they arrived. But he was in a moment of panic. He was in a moment of distress. He was trying to defend his sister, respect his sister, help his sister, not really understanding like the impact of the choices he was making in that moment and how they could be so cruelly twisted against him. And I never knew what happened to him. That was the only time I ever saw him. I didn't even know his name. But it really did stick with me, because for a lot of people in our criminal justice system, it is those split-second decisions that changes the course of everything. And we're seeing these people on their worst days, but you know, sometimes their worst days didn't come from a place of malicious intent. Honestly, I do carry that with me in the current law I practice as well, just because, especially car accidents and stuff like that, a lot of the people that we are suing, that we are, you know, going after, they didn't make a malicious decision either. A lot of them did, but not all of them. And like that case I just talked about with our elderly client, the driver for the big box company, she didn't mean to hurt anybody, right? She misread her amount of time to make it across an intersection and didn't see a car that was coming. And that changed her life forever. And while it doesn't change the advocacy I have for my clients, it definitely changes the sense of compassion I have for the people that we are sometimes working against. And it certainly changes, and it did change the perspective I have about the justice system at large and where there are a lot of things that could be adjusted and improved on.
At CloudLex, we understand the unique demands and opportunities that personal injury law firms face every day. That's why we've built a comprehensive platform designed exclusively for personal injury law. Our seamless case management, AI engine, litigation support, and record retrieval solutions empower you at every stage, from intake through settlement and beyond, helping you stay productive, organized, and focused on achieving successful outcomes for your clients. Explore what's possible at cloudlex.com. Now here is this episode's closing argument.
This involved a client who, he was in his early 30s and he was riding home from the gym one day on his motorcycle. It was dark out, road wasn't lit super well, and there's a lot of construction going on. As he was driving, next thing he knows, there's headlights in front of him and his body is catapulted through the air. He has shattered his leg in numerous places. The bone is sticking through his kneecap. As the story unfolds, he finds counsel. We start to put together what happened to him that day. We learn that another driver, she was traveling, headed down the opposite direction, also on her way home from work, and she thinks she's following the traffic cone. She knows where she's going. It's pretty dark out again, and she's just like, okay, I just got to follow these cones to wherever the heck they're trying to take me. And next thing she knows, she's head on with a motorcycle and just sees a body go flying over the roof of her car. Now, that seems like a pretty straightforward case, right? Driver who drives down the wrong side of the road, hits our client, let's sue her. That's not the perspective we took, and I think that's what made the case as unique as it was. By the time I got brought in mid-2024, a very different story had played out. We had resolved everything with the driver, and now we were looking down how we could hold who we thought was really responsible for this collision, and that's the construction companies. The people who left the road in the way that it was, such that she could get confused in the dark and think that she was being led over to the other side of the road. And you start to see a story of just some really bad choices made by not just the construction company itself, but by the company who designed the plans and put all of this together. So we continue to pursue this case against the construction companies, and we're building up our case. We get to mediation, and they're like, you guys got nothing. We're going to offer you $4,000. We're talking like $1 billion, massive companies. There's a little bit more than $4,000 on the table, and our client certainly had more than $4,000 in injuries after multiple reconstructive surgeries to his leg. We obviously did not take the $4,000, and we're like, okay, well, we'll see you at trial then. We show up to the first day of trial, and we're working our way through jury selection. And my boss stands up and he asks a question to the panel. Any of you guys ever remember construction on Woodstruck Road? Immediately, collective groan across the courtroom. And some woman under her breath just kind of like whispers to herself, yeah, it was a mess. My boss, he picks that up, he hears that, he goes, what did you say, ma'am? Can you repeat that? She goes, yeah, it was a mess. I almost got into accidents like 5 different times when I was driving down that road at night. I mean, you can imagine, like, applause is sounding in my head as she says that, because that is the case that we are here for today. Like, little do you know what's in store for you, ma'am. Obviously, I mean, she's stricken, but the bell can't be unrung. You can't take back what she just said in front of 40 different people, some of which would definitely be on the jury panel. And that sentiment clearly carried its way all the way to the defense counsel. We finish our jury selection for that day. We get our panel, and we leave the courthouse that day. And we go back to our office, and we're working on my opening statement that I was nervously very excited to give because it was going to be my first opening before a real jury. We're sitting there and we're talking, and the phone starts ringing, and it's one of the defendants, and he's like, we'll give you what you want. We'll give you $300,000. Will that satisfy your needs? I'm like, well, maybe, but you got one other defendant to rope in. We're not letting you out unless you're both coming out, and you better meet our demand, which is way higher than $300,000 right now. You're kind of playing low ball. And we hang up the phone and let them sit. Well, we get to trial the next day. I am setting up my PowerPoint, and one of the attorneys approaches me for one of the defendants, and he goes, "Can we talk?" As I step aside with him in the room, and he's like, "Look, we're willing to meet whatever number you want. We know you're above $1 million. Just tell us a number and we'll meet it." And safe to say, within maybe 30 minutes, we had a full agreed on plan for $1.3 million, and they, I believe, would cover the mediation costs. And that was that. But that was a verdict that we didn't even think we would have gotten from the jury, let alone from them, from an offer that they made the eve of the beginning of real trial, all because of, one little comment that a juror made that absolutely changed the fate of what was going to happen in that courtroom that following week. I remember leaving the courthouse, and I get in my car and I just started sobbing. Genuinely just sobbing, because I was sad in a weird way. I was sad for myself. I was sad that I didn't get to give this opening statement, that I didn't get to see this play out in the way that I was hoping for, that zealous advocate in me that just wouldn't quite die. But I was also so relieved. So many nerves, so many weeks of trial prep, so many late evenings that were just like gone and over, and in such like a seemingly anticlimactic way that was also, I knew, the very best outcome that we ever could have wished for. Really, the takeaway that I got from that entire experience is that the perseverance you put in can really impact the outcome that you walk away with. Certainly no trial lawyer in their right mind is going to accept $4,000 with $100,000+ in injuries. But they might have stopped at that $300,000. They might have stopped at any little offer that came along the way. They might not have spent those 30 minutes making sure that they got up to that $1.3 million standing outside that courtroom, or they might have said no, and they might have gone ahead and risked everything. And I really just was impressed by the work we put in to get there, but I was more so impressed by knowing when to stop and knowing what it takes to do everything and anything it is to get that best outcome for the client.
You've been listening to Celebrating Justice, presented by CloudLex and the Trial Lawyers Journal. Remember, the stories don't end here. Visit triallawyersjournal.com to become part of our community and keep the conversation going. And for a deeper dive into the tools that empower personal injury law firms, visit cloudlex.com/TLJ to learn more.